My name is Sabina. I represent the rare disease community. I'm a patient caregiver, amplifying the patient voice within drug development. My father was to do a routine employment physical. Youth and that doctor and that curiosity set us on this trajectory, determined that my father has Fabry disease. Rare disease is genetic. There were no clinical trials. So many other challenges that we share within the community.
It's a rare disease, but in your circle, it is not rare.
My sister and I speaking at some FDA hearings and pretty much how we're able to get my father on banded access. Women, there's a lot of medical gaslighting, and it's so easy for the women to be forgotten. Fabry is multisystemic. Initial diagnosis is so difficult.
The biology wasn't really understood.
It wasn't understood. That's the thing. They were accepting, they had 23 patients. There were a handful that were accepting women. The next 12 years, I spent traveling from here to another state and to make sure that pharma and biotech are seeing the burdens that patients face. I'm a firm believer in having that patient voice. They're just looking at it on paper without really discussing the true lived experience of the patient and caregiver. It really is going to lend itself to a much more successful trial experience. Data drives decisions. Fabry disease is one of only 5% of rare diseases that have approved treatment. 95% of these diseases out there. And I said 300 million people worldwide. Our impact has manifested itself completely different in all four of us. Every body is different.
Yeah, right. Everybody.
I could be one of maybe 5 patients in the entire conference because everyone has a voice.
Everyone has a voice.
That your lack of patience, surprising and upsetting. No idea, because they're so focused in on the sales pitch to actually, I can get so frustrated sometimes because with a vendor that has no interest in speaking to a patient, their end user, if you want to say, really. And it's funny how you said the patient centric and patient centricity and patient first, those words that we've been hearing for over 5-10 years. I think that patient engagement is just fluff and just checking the box off. Well, I think that a lot of really good things are happening out there. I just think that there needs to be more of it. Biotech companies having the true focus on patient advocacy infused throughout their daily activities. I think that's incredibly important. In the end, you're talking to people, how we can all make each other's lives better.
Well, hello. Welcome to the next episode of IPZO Facto podcast. I'm your host, Zena Manji, and I am thrilled to have with me today Sabina Kineen. Sabina, I met earlier this year, and she is a patient advocate for rare disease. And she has, in her experience, has also worked with pharma and providing insights. And it's so important to have the patient voice in advocacy, but also in development. And so I was so happy to meet Sabina. And with this podcast, I think this is a really important episode to bring some messages forward to you, the audience, and what you can do with if you're going through some struggles and what you can do and how you can help in sharing your information as well. And I think you'll learn a lot from Sabina's story. So Sabina, thank you so much for joining me today. And if you could introduce yourself to the audience and also what inspires you most in doing what you do.
Thanks again for having me, Zena, and it was a pleasure meeting you. Like you said, I just really have the pleasure of working with pharmaceutical companies and other people within life sciences and other patients. But really, what inspires me is just, again, helping others who are who are taking this journey and really, again, as you said, amplifying the patient voice. I think it's so incredibly important for so many different reasons to hear the patient perspective, especially within drug development, starting from the beginning. But it's just an honor. You asked me what inspires me, listening to The Cure and thinking everything was grand. My father was in his 40s. I am the youngest of 6. We're an immigrant family. And my father was in his 40s, and he went to his family physician to do a routine employment physical. And with that employment physical, they did a urinalysis, and happened to see that he was spilling protein in his urine, and a pretty significant amount, which indicates a decline in kidney function. Well,
Mm.
my father, otherwise seemingly healthy, this young doctor, directly out of his, just finished his residency, was curious why this my father was having issues with his kidneys. And
Mm.
I think that youth and that doctor and that curiosity really is what saved, kind of set us on this trajectory, because he wanted to know what was happening and kept pushing and pushing, asking my father all kinds of questions. And, we never would have believed it, but he narrowed it down after a battery of tests and sending out lab work,
Mm.
going up to teaching hospitals in bigger cities, determined that my father has Fabry disease. So that's Fabry, Fabry disease, and it does fall under the rare disease distinction here in the US. Is
Mm.
multi-systemic, but one of the classic symptoms is kidney failure. So when my father was diagnosed, it is genetic.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of opened the doors and opened our eyes. In fact, when a person is diagnosed with Fabry disease, um, and they're the first in the family, it's an average of 5 other family members that can be diagnosed with that. So,
Oh.
so it explained right away why he had 2 older brothers that had severe kidney dysfunction,
Oh.
and his mother had an early stroke, and there was a whole other host of things that kind of pieces fell together.
Mm.
Um, but it's interesting because my father, again, I said otherwise healthy, like so many other undiagnosed rare disease patients, these symptoms become your norm. Like you don't
Mm.
realize that you have pains every day or GI issues or headaches.
Mm.
And I think that's what makes it challenging for so many people in the rare disease world, because you've got like I say this, like, imagine trying to put together a puzzle and you don't have that picture on the front of the box, and you have all these
Yeah.
different pieces. And I think that's what it kind of the doctor did. He took those pieces without that picture and he put it together, and really went forth in diagnosing not only my father, but ended up diagnosing my 4 sisters and I, because it is carried on the X chromosome. And I can explain all that
Oh.
as well, but it that in itself lent it to an interesting journey for the next 40 years, especially with women. But yeah, it's again, going back to the original question, what inspires me? It's my family. For the next
Yeah.
40 years, I've been fortunate enough to use my voice, and it wasn't always easy. There was just so many
Mm.
ups and downs in this journey, but 40 years ago, nobody heard of Fabry. There were no clinical trials. So talking to
Yeah.
a doctor, talking to anyone in drug development was just nearly impossible. So we've come a long way, come a very long way.
Wow, Sabina, that's quite a story. And I guess for the audience who may not be aware of what rare disease means, could you go into how something is defined as a rare disease?
Yeah, it's kind of I always laugh because the word rare is a little misleading. It really truly is. It's rare individually, but
Yeah.
collectively, the number of people who suffer from a rare disease, there's over 300 million in the worldwide. So that's not a small number. It's just
Yeah.
that, right now, I believe the number is about 10,000 or so distinguished or named diseases that fall under the rare disease category. Here in the US, it's anything fewer than 200,000 patients in the US. I believe in the European Union, they define it less than 5 within 10,000 people. With Fabry disease, at one
Mm.
point, and I'm not sure that the statistic always changes with new diagnoses and new ways to find people who have it, but it used to be 1 in 40,000. So I used to explain to people, like, okay, picture a large like stadium with 40,000 people in it, and only one person has Fabry disease. So that was one
Yeah.
way of describing it. But again, you know, it sounds like there's so few of us, but really together, there's just this,
Collectively.
yeah, and it's a very powerful thing too. it's a strong community, and I'm very honored to represent it.
And it's wonderful, Sabina, that you're taking your situation and you're contributing to advancement. You're contributing to just knowledge, and also I imagine you're connecting, as you said, with other patients with the same condition, and the support network, and where people can go, which doctors know about it, which, like you mentioned, teaching institutions, and all of these things where uh they can go a little deeper into research, right, typically.
Mhm.
And so let's talk about that a little bit. Your experience now, I guess it started with your father, and that's when you became aware of it, and because of this physician, you had a lot of curiosity for whatever reason it didn't come up before. Um, it's something that is rare. You do, in a physician level, I guess you do have to really hunt for what could be causing these conditions. And when it started to, I guess, in my words, start to flare, with your father, where concerned enough to come to the physician, right, and say, look, um, can we see what's happening, and the physician to understand that there's something a little bit different here. Let me find out more. That was your father's experience. Now your experience, I guess you were then diagnosed as a young child, but
I was
with this
I was a teenager. Yeah, I was a teenager, and
you're a
it was
teenager.
really it was subsequent to my father's diagnosis, and yeah.
Okay.
So with many genetic diseases, and within the rare community, a lot of times, again, once one person in the family is diagnosed, then it kind of opens the door, and you're able to go through the family line, and like look for symptoms, and ask questions, and then of course go through diagnostic process. Because Fabry is carried on the X chromosome, we immediately knew that my four sisters and I would have it, but we did have the testing.
Hmm.
But interestingly enough, Zena, so I'll kind of cover 2 points here that I think are
Sure.
important to this question that you said. One, you asked me, about, like, it did start with my father, my advocacy. And when I say I'm also want to speak
Mm.
on behalf of my sisters as well, because, and my whole family, we have a very strong family, and we have a close family, and everyone is very, this impacts so many of us in here. So I'm speaking on behalf of my family. But so when you have that diagnosis, your first, especially a rare disease that nobody really heard of, or you don't have any clear understanding of, or it's not in the news, or you're just not
Right.
it's not well known. So your focus is on that family member at first, and you're trying to find either treatment, or just trying to get your bearings. Well, then you realize, well, maybe
Right.
you're not alone. So then you start looking for other patients. Well, in our case, 40 years ago, that was before the internet, before podcasts,
Yeah. Right.
everything, and there really wasn't a lot out there. So we didn't have anybody else. But then we were able to connect with a few other, a few years down the road, we were able to connect with some other patients through,
So it's a
um,
few years.
yeah,
Wow.
oh yeah, yeah, and then through the Fabry Support and Information Group, which is a group that I'm now involved with, which I hold with such high esteem. But you again, you connect with other patients within your specific disease state community. But then you realize, you're like, wow, having a rare disease, someone may have, say, another fairly well-known rare disease is cystic fibrosis. Well, you have someone
Right.
with cystic fibrosis, yes, people have heard about it, but it is still considered rare. Well,
Mm.
they face a lot of the same challenges, even though our disease states are completely different, our symptoms and such. But we have challenges with insurance, with
Hmm.
people understanding what's going on in our body, fighting invisible disease, dealing with your school, work. There's so many other challenges that we share within the rare disease
Right.
community. And then you realize that, in my case, I realized that, then it even, my circle has widened, because then I realized patients of all sorts, and we're all patients at one point in our life. Nobody has
Yeah,
gone through life without having to go to the doctor, or have a
that's
family member
right.
that has some type of illness. So when, that's where I've kind of branched out and really begun to speak more to just bigger sectors of pharma and life sciences, and realizing, especially like within clinical trials, that
Right.
it's just, we all, there's so many of the same challenges. But I'm not just only representing rare disease, even though that's where my heart is, but
Yes.
just the patient voice in general.
Right, right.
um,
I guess with rare disease, it puts a focused spotlight, right? Um,
it does.
and it's kind of supercharged in a higher level of intensity because there's fewer, and um, there's not as much known, right? But as you say, the patient experience, whoever the patient is, whatever disease, it's a similar kind of need, right? In terms of care, how you access care, how do you know where to get care from whom, and who else is has a similar condition. So I can see. I mean, like you mentioned, it's a rare disease, but in your circle, it is not rare.
No.
It's your family. You're all going through it. A similar situation, I suppose. And I guess you learn from each other, right? You're all talking to doctors and going through your own experiences as well. So each of you, I guess, are sharing. Well, this is what I'm doing. This is what I heard this here, and this doctor said this over there in my appointment. It also relates to the rest of you, right?
It does. And again, I'm very, very fortunate that we have our family, even though there's several family members that are involved, or I should say impacted directly with the disease. And we're all impacted. Let me put that all out. Not
Oh,
only the ones who have the disease itself, but our
yeah,
spouses, our other children,
right,
our siblings that don't have it. Everyone is impacted in the family for a variety of reasons. But
right,
yes, we do have each other. And, that's what's, I think, I feel very fortunate to have that. But there are so many Fabry patients and other rare disease patients. And many have never even met another Fabry patient, because
yeah,
maybe, have a much smaller family, or have no one else that's impacted.
right.
Because there are definitely cases of spontaneous mutations, where
Mm,
there's only one family member um, who's been diagnosed. So yeah, we're fortunate, and and again, you have to seek out the community, and the community is so much broader within the rare disease space, because it's not only um, it's not only just the patients, but it's the caregivers, it's the family,
right,
it's the
right.
researchers, it's the people in the biotechs and the pharma companies that are working on finding, or they're working in drug development to better the lives of the rare disease patients. It is a wider community, and I think that that's really important to lean into, and to remember you're not alone. That's one thing I'm always trying to get across to patients, especially those that are recently diagnosed, that you are not alone. You may feel it, but you're not.
Yeah, exactly. And you do hear about those patients who, uh, there it is very rare, even in their own circle, right? Especially with rare disease of children as well, right? There are those situations, and struggle to find anyone else who has the same disease because they might be in a different country even, as well. And you mentioned clinical trials, and with rare disease, how did you get connected, or what do you know about rare disease and how people get connected with any trials that may be going on? Certainly, if your healthcare professional is involved and researches more, I guess that's where the search starts, and starting to connect with, well, who's really researching in this space. But it
No,
can be quite challenging, right?
well, that's a really tough one because, ideally, having a rare disease. Well, first of all, true rare disease specialists are going to be only located in
Yeah,
centers of excellence. So then you're talking major
right.
hospitals, major cities, and you think of the wide scope of our country in the U.S. at least, and across the world.
Yeah,
There's so many patients out there that don't have easy access to these
right.
centers of excellence. So even, I'm fortunate. I live in an area where I can drive an hour and a half, and I'm right there with the specialist. But driving an hour and a half is also a big deal for some people because they may not have,
Yeah,
they may not have transportation or even just taking off work. But going back to starting with how you find out about clinical trials,
yeah,
that's a tough one. I will tell
yeah,
you. I mean, clinical trials, you'd think that your physicians would be coming to you and saying, "Oh, look at all these trials happening." Well, that's not always the case. And it certainly was not the case for me years and years ago. Again, turning back the clock here, and 40 years ago, there were no trials going on. So I
yeah,
was diagnosed in 1984, and the first trials didn't happen until the 90s. And at that time, we found out about it. I mean, it's interesting because I did find an old email. I printed it out. I had sent in like 1992 or something. Maybe four
oh,
emails were super popular, but I was reaching out to someone in Germany, and I can't remember the position. But here I was in the U.S. trying to find a trial for my father. Again,
mm,
our focus was on our dad, and um, there were then once trials started happening. You realize that the inclusion and exclusion criteria that is created for these trials
yeah,
so tight. And I understand the
right.
reason, but it's like, if you really want to include these patients and you need to get patients, because we all know that people, you always hear it that in pharma and biotech when you're trying to get a trial started. Oh, patient recruitment is so tough. Well, don't make the exclusion and inclusion criteria so tight that you can't have these people. Like for instance, my father, his kidney function, he was turned away because his kidney function had declined too much.
Mm,
And it's like telling someone, "No, you're too sick. I'm sorry, we can't help you." So
yeah.
that in itself is a kick in the gut.
That hurts,
So
right? Because you're in a condition where you feel you need more
you
help
need more,
because
yes,
you're more advanced.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it took a number of years, and it took a lot of pushing and being very vocal, including my sister and I speaking at some FDA hearings and pretty much begging
Okay.
for help. We're able to get my father on, I guess it would be considered expanded access trial here in the
Right.
U.S.
Right.
So he was on a trial for like 7 years, but that also included travel, 2.5 hour drive each way every 2 weeks for infusions, which I
And you
know
were you were living in the Northeast
I
at
am.
that
Yes,
that
yes.
time.
Again, very, very fortunate to be in the Northeast, where it's a hotbed of research and hot and amazing medical centers. But again, I know how fortunate I am, where we're talking. There's so many people across this country and across the world that don't have that access. But and we had to fight for that. We had to like fight to get
Mm,
that in. And my dad did well for quite a long time. And I look at that trial. He was on it for 7 years, and then ended up having to come off of it, not because of my father's health or any other reason, but for multiple other reasons within like the company ended up discontinuing the trial here in the United States.
mm.
But that gave us seven, and then eventually my father, I guess maybe a total of 10 more years of life with my dad.
Wow.
And those 10 years were amazing. He got to see all his grandchildren born. He was
Oh,
old enough to make solid memories with him. And, that was really special. He lived far beyond the life expectancy that was first thought with his Fabry diagnosis. So again, we were very fortunate. So again, our focus was on my dad,
mm.
and I guess I really haven't touched on the point where women. It was a big challenge for women. I think this is a good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very big challenge for women with Fabry disease because, let's just face it. even today, women, there's a lot of medical gaslighting. I mean, men and women, but just
Yeah.
it's so easy for the women to be forgotten. So again,
Is
rewinding.
that because of how the symptoms show up for this?
Well, and this is interesting. So 40 years ago, even the top researchers in Fabry disease, wonderful, talented researchers, but they truly thought that it was X-linked recessive and that women would need
Mm.
symptoms. In fact, with that, our first diagnosis when we were sitting around the table at the genetic counselor and the physician, they straight out told my sisters and I, don't worry, you will never have any symptoms. You will, you
Mm.
pass it along, but you will never suffer any symptoms because that's what
Because of what they believe the genetic uh
yes,
makeup.
they just didn't understand, and that's the thing. You're
Mm.
constantly learning more about when with rare diseases. They also had said some other things, which you would never say these days, where they pretty much said that we should not have children, and if we got pregnant,
Uh,
terminate the pregnancy, which you'll never hear
wow.
come out of a genetic counselor's mouth now. But um, so for many, many, many years in the Fabry community, the females were just called carriers. And in fact, if you Google it now,
Mm.
there's still the worst use of the word carrier, and
Mm.
it's incredibly frustrating because women are not
I
just.
guess that's been perpetuated.
It has been perpetuated. So thankfully, reality has caught up. Research has caught up with reality, and women are recognized as having Fabry. Now, some women are much more like less symptomatic than others. Some women have more symptoms than some males. It's I know it does without getting into the biology of it, but uh, the X-lionization and the randomization of the activation of the gene in each cell is a little bit different with women. But right now, and it's interesting. And without okay, so with all rare diseases and with all diseases and stuff,
Mm.
we have a gene variant, and of course that gene variant is carried down through our family line. So we have the same gene variant as my father. He passed it down to my sisters and I. You would think that you'd be able to look at that specific gene variant and determine how Fabry would impact the body. Because one thing I didn't talk about is Fabry is multisystemic. So I did mention the kidney decline, but it also
Right.
causes GI issues. It causes heat and cold intolerance, extreme pain, fatigue, depression, cerebral vascular events. Like I personally have had several
Wow.
TIAs.
Oh my gosh.
There's a whole host of other things. How
And
it
they're
impacts
all
the
happening
body.
at different times.
Yes,
So
and
if
some
someone
people
doesn't know about this condition, it could be misdiagnosed,
oh, it's constantly
missed.
diagnosed. I mean, if you think about
Yeah.
it, you hear about all those symptoms, they could be attributed to
Like, I
just
mean,
about anything.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's why initial diagnosis is so difficult. But again, so let's see, going back to my teens and through my 20s, and I'm just going to speak for myself, even though, again, my sisters and so many other women within the Fabry community also experienced this. But my personal experience, I had migraine, I had pain, I had embarrassing GI issues all through school. I had episodes of syncope. I
Wow.
all these different things. I even had my first TIA in my early 30s, and
Mm.
it like nobody pieced it together. I would go. I mean, if you think about it, I had an official
But
diagnosis.
even though, yeah, right.
Had an official diagnosis of Fabry disease, but I would go to the doctor, and they're like, "Oh, it can't be your Fabry because women aren't impacted or they're not affected by it."
So
So
it was just that
it took
awareness wasn't there.
it wasn't there, so it took many years. So um,
So
I
the
finally
biology wasn't really understood.
yeah, it wasn't understood. That's the thing. So eventually, like I said, researchers kind of and clinicians finally came to the conclusion that women did, in fact, have the same symptoms and can be impacted
Mm.
detrimentally. And so we, going back to the clinical trials, we had my father kind of settled. And at this point in my life, I'm married. I do have amazing children who I'm just grateful I have. Didn't listen to that genetic counselor. um, But I decided it was time to kind of take a step and help myself. So I started researching to try to find a clinical
Mm-hmm.
trial. And I
Mm-hmm.
went to my favorite website in the world.
And this is before or after you had children?
This is after I had children.
Okay.
So I had two young children. We were a blended family, so I had three children, two biological. But I decided to find a trial for myself, and I went to clinicaltrials.gov.
Right.
So not the most patient friendly trial, especially, or excuse me, site, especially 20 years ago, I guess.
Right.
And I found one. I found one.
Hmm.
It was this small biotech, never heard of, and it ended up being, they were accepting. They had 23 patients, starting as a phase 2, and I said 23 patients, I think worldwide. Um,
Wow.
and I think I can't remember how many here in the U.S., but there were a handful that were accepting women, and I was super
Hmm.
excited. So for the next 12 years, I spent traveling from here to another state and with flying. And
Hmm.
I was part of a trial from stage phase 2 all the way through fruition and FDA approval. 12 years.
Wow.
But Zena, let me tell you, it was so worth it, but there was so much sacrifice. And this
Yeah.
is what happens with rare disease. If you're able to get
I
onto a
guess you're not really given much of a choice, right? I
no,
mean,
and that's the thing is
the
clinical
rest of your life
trials.
has to work around it.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of my experience with clinical trials has shaped my advocacy because I've seen the
Mm.
possibilities. Now my voice, I lend it to like in the drug development world and say, the sacrifices that I had to make back
Yeah.
then without the resources that we have now and the capabilities, meaning I had to travel, I would fly to this other state to get a urinalysis, a blood draw, and a history and an EKG. And I would lose 2 days of time, 2 days of work, 2 days
Wow.
for my family. Well, think about this. If we're trying to get a diverse patient population,
Yeah.
how many patients can do that? I quit my full time job and was
Wow.
depending on my amazing family and friends and the supportive husband. Not everyone has that, and
Mm.
I was able to do that. So now, like I said, I try to find ways and to make sure that um, that pharma and biotech are seeing the burdens that patients face when they're either trying
Yeah.
to get on a trial or trying to stay on a trial, and what even trials that are happening in their own hometown. If there's so many different sacrifices. So, um, I'm a firm believer in having that patient voice as part of that, and really helping the whole process run a lot smoother and be more effective. So it's a win-win situation for both all stakeholders. We'll say.
Yeah. I guess the yeah, and that benefit comes about when there's access, right? And with um, so-called remote trial, decentralized trials, all these different tools that are available.
Exactly.
I think there's a lot of opportunity to do things better, to get closer to where the patients are, and still be able to run a robust trial.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Things have changed dramatically since I first started, or even back, when I was first diagnosed. So yeah, just to have the simplest thing, and I think like a big thing is just being able to, well, number one, I always say is have a patient and caregiver part of the protocol writing and development,
Hmm.
because I can't tell you how many times we all know how many times do companies put literally millions of dollars, and they invest all this money into putting together a protocol, selecting sites, recruiting investigators and all of these things, and then but never speak to a patient until they're right at the end. And then they
Yeah.
realize that what they're asking of the patient community is just not feasible, and it's not filling a need. It's not feeling like they're assuming
Right.
that they know what the patients need or what they want, like what their
Right.
endpoint is, because they're just kind of looking at it on paper without really discussing the true lived experience of the patient and caregiver. So if you do infuse that perspective in from the beginning, you're going to save so much time, so much money, and it really is going to lend itself to a much more successful trial experience all around, and hopefully, better the lives of the patients as
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's double down on that a little bit. So,
well.
um, you talk about the patient lived experience. We also talk about the voice of the patient into clinical trials, into development. And what you described is exactly that, because I think where it helps companies to talk to patients in the design, in the clinical design aspect, is really, as you described, is we need to understand how the disease is experienced, right? How is the patient experiencing the disease? So therefore, you can also see how how the patient is experiencing the treatment or the
Correct.
trial, right? And if you think about it, we design ultimately there would be designed these pivotal trials, and pivotal trials for the purpose of registration, right? And if those pivotal trials are designed in a certain way, that becomes a basis of how the drug is dosed, how it's administered, who it's administered to, timings, condition of use, etc. And if that trial was not optimized to bring in that patient experience of using the product or the caregivers, it can create some barriers to actually use that product more optimally,
Oh yeah.
whereby you would get more of that development. So really having that patient experience in from the beginning and in designing a trial, actually, like you said, it's not designing it on paper, and it's not an academic exercise, right? It's
Exactly.
actually,
Exactly.
how is the patient going to use this, understand what they're going through, not just biologically, not just clinical numbers, but what are they actually experiencing, such that they will even stay in the trial, and the trial itself doesn't create a barrier.
Oh yeah, no, and that's exactly the things that I try to discuss with the organizations is yeah, if you have to find out what their real experience is, and again, whether or not if, for instance, a lot of Fabry patients are infusions and take infusions every 2 weeks, and which
Mm,
is a very difficult thing. But even just working around that, well, what does it mean? Is it an infusion that is going to take 6 hours? It's an infusion that's going to take 1 hour
right,
somewhere
right.
they can do at home, or do they need to go into a center? So again, that's even like past the trial, that's post market. But those are incredibly important things. What if you
Yeah,
have you need some type of flexibility? There's so many. Again, we talk about accessibility to not only the trial but to just care in general, even post market,
right.
but listening to the patient and caregivers. And I always say caregivers because so many of these conditions require a caregiver. And I'm not even just talking about pediatric. I mean, that's a whole other thing where there's, again, so many rare diseases impact pediatric population, but also, adult caregivers and or even
Yeah,
just support. Like my husband, I don't necessarily rely on him for daily activities, but he's also my caregiver if I have to go to the hospital for the emergency room. So it all kind of like you need all of these perspectives in play here to really make it a valuable situation, or successful situation too. So
yeah.
and that's where I think the patient voice and the caregiver voice really needs to be heard and amplified.
Yeah, and if you really think about that patient experience in the trial, right? If they're sitting for a 6-hour infusion, I mean, how can they be mobile, right? Is there a way that they can be mobile? Can it be done remotely in any way, right? Or at home, through a caregiver, perhaps, or how, and you're bringing to mind that when patients are accessing these trials, the accessibility of the trial, well, if they have to fly to a center to get checks, and for progression tests and things like this in between for assessment, if they have to fly to do that, that means if they're working, they have to take time off of work. Um, you know, what's coming to mind is, oftentimes you're a professional patient.
Yeah,
I mean,
it
you
does.
you can't work because there are things that you need to do, or maybe, hopefully you would hope that these days, with remote working possibilities, and that corporations would be more understanding, and allow people to also work as well. It's really not about the work or the capability, but how do you provide that work? It can be provided in several different ways, in many
And
many companies. You don't actually have to be in the office, or you can, flip your timing so that you can, still take care of yourself, and at the same time still work. You don't have
yeah, I
to
mean,
quit.
you have to look for flexibility all around, and it's always
Yeah,
each individual person, each individual participant in the trial, for instance, they're in a unique situation. Well, again,
right.
I was able to fly, but and to take time, or as you said, maybe work remotely. But if I'm working at the local grocery store, or if I'm working,
Yeah,
there's no
you
such
can't
thing
work remotely.
as
Yeah,
remotely. And
that's
if you
right.
really want to have a diverse population, you want to make sure that you are covering all the bases and you are removing these burdens that are so easily that they're just overlooked. And that's where, when it comes down to writing the protocol and having that voice and really looking at it in just a wide angle and trying to imagine all types of patients and what they're facing, how will they be able to achieve, how will they be able to successfully participate in this trial? And that's where, there's so many different tools even to find that. There's satisfaction surveys out there that help you find out, what the site, it all goes down to what site. If
Yeah,
you pick a site that is completely inaccessible to a large community, that's a big thing. Now I'm a big proponent of having sites that are local to especially underserved communities and underrepresented
right.
communities, where they don't necessarily they could just take a one quick bus ride versus change buses, get on a train, go this and then whatever to get to the site, and maybe they're only taking an hour or two off. Maybe they have childcare issues. They're single families that
Yeah, that's
parents.
right.
So really, if you're going to reach a diverse population, you need to make sure you are understanding all of the types of burdens, because it's very easy to fall into what would be a burden to me, what would be a burden to you. But you really have to be able to think about a wider spread of people, because we all live unique lives and we have unique challenges. Um, but
Yeah, and you know, with this day and age, as we say, and advancements are happening every year, every 6 months, really. There's new things coming.
oh yeah,
There, you know, the, it should be a continuous process to look for better ways, but it all starts with understanding the patient.
exactly. Yeah, it's understanding that and to plan ahead. To get to say this, yeah,
Hmm.
you have the voice in there and you're planning, and then you're budgeting for these things. You're budgeting for reimbursement for transportation. You're budgeting for
Yeah.
reimbursement for childcare or that type of thing, and you're understanding that, because if you truly want your trial to be successful, you're going to need to put the dollars where they need to be, and not let them be wasted with a failed trial because you didn't listen to the patient in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're illuminating a lot of things here, Sabina. I think, we always hear about, voice of the patient, and this, and especially in recent years, I would say, much more stressed. But when you really put yourself in the patient's shoes, you're actually feeling the voice of the patient is another thing versus just kind of saying it academically, you know.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I'm
go
sorry. Go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that one thing that I'm really passionate too about is trying to get hard data to
Yes.
back everything that I'm sitting here saying. There's so many there's organizations and there's researchers out there that are very passionate about patient engagement, and they're working hard to find hard data to take back to people in the
Right.
C-suite to show that all of these things that I'm talking about really will impact your ROI. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I heard in a recent conference,
That's
data,
right.
data drives decisions. And so
Yes.
many people think that patient engagement is still fluff. It's not. It is not fluff. It
And
is
that it's more
necessity.
preferences versus, right?
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
necessity. And I think that I mean, that's where I'm trying to get is like, again, that hard data and the reports and the abstracts written and the white papers written that show that everything that I'm sitting here talking about is it's proven fact, and it's needed. It's really needed.
Now, especially in the case of rare disease, because you need more patients, right? You mentioned this trial you were in, I think it was 23. Um, so that's a small number, right? Um, and when you look at more common diseases, it's a very small number. So even more so to make it more accessible in a rare condition, because like you said, in your situation, the biology was still being researched. I guess there's still a lot of learnings happening as well still. And but if there's no research done, if you can't access patients, then nothing will progress.
Correct. Yeah.
And and so it's so critical to use the tools and advancing tools to figure out how we can make it easier to bring patients in and really see how much of an improvement is there. It's not just an improvement in numbers, but it's an improvement in life and life experience. How you're experiencing that treatment in a better way. And I think often that's a innovation in itself, right? You have drug A and drug B, but if they both might work well clinically, but drug B might be more suitable for patients' lives and
Mhm.
how it's administered and how many tests may have to be done, in between, or even how often it may be provided. I mean, we look at HIV drugs and how those have advanced significantly
Absolutely.
in terms of how often to take them, right?
It's interesting you brought that up because when you read about Fabry disease, again, this is another reason I feel so fortunate that where Fabry disease is one of only 5% of rare diseases that have approved treatment. You think about that number.
Wow.
95% of these diseases out there, and I said 300 million people worldwide are impacted. 5% have treatment. Fabry has now have three in the U.S. And
Mm.
we are just incredibly fortunate to have choices. But people, so I've been asked, well, why do you keep pushing for more research in Fabry? And I said, because one, that's a perfect example of HIV. Things are always improving. Things become easier for patients, which makes them more
Yeah.
compliant, and it just improves their lives. Well, maybe there's gene therapy studies. There's so many different things, but also, just like people seem to think that if they develop a treatment um, for a disease, a rare disease, that it's going to work for everyone. I mentioned to you about
Mm,
my sisters and I all having the same gene variant. Well,
right.
the disease has manifests itself completely different in all four of us.
Really?
So, and we've all four of us have reacted differently or responded differently to different levels of the different treatments out there. So,
Huh.
one treatment that seems to work for me has not worked for my one sister. So, it's very hard. That's this kind of thing. We're always, always, always pushing for more research, more, data collection and stuff, just because we need more choices. Can't just
Yeah,
assume,
and I guess.
yeah, one drug is going to work. It's going to be a cure all everything for everybody. So
And the drugs are based on smaller populations than more common conditions, right? So you are really seeing the differences in post-market when patients are actually using the product.
exactly.
Um, with more common diseases, you have a much larger population that ends up using it post-market, but with rare disease, it's still a small amount. So you're still learning about how the therapy is working, actually, even though it's FDA approved.
Exactly. It is. It's interesting. Yeah, it would be nice to know, just be able to say, oh, this is going to work for you, and but that's not the case because every body is different. We all know that.
Yeah, right. Everybody. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And so, Sabina, you talked about how you looked up clinical trials, right? And you actually found one. Was that the beginning of your kind of interaction, I would say, with kind of the development side of
Yeah. Well, I mean, ironically, my husband and I met prior to that. At this point, I had mentioned that we had our family started, but my husband and I met when we were both working at a clinical research organization, a CRO, a small one, but
Oh,
it wasn't. I had nothing to do with the development side. I was in human resources, and he was in IT. It just
interesting.
happened to be so. But it was a small CRO, and I definitely picked up on some of the lingo. We'll just say that I was a little bit
Okay.
more comfortable, had a little bit more of that literacy down pat, which
Hmm.
again I was very fortunate, and that made it a lot easier for me to do the research and to kind of understand what was being asked of me.
Yeah.
But we joke about that all the time. That how do we end up at a CRO, and here I am, full circle working with industry again. Um, but yeah, so that was my search, my dive into clinical trials is where I started to make connections within the broader community, and yeah, I was just asked to share my story, share my voice, and I've been fortunate enough to be introduced to people like you, Zena, along the way at different conferences, and invited into situations like this, or more important, not to say no more importantly, I should say that another way that I've been able to do that is I've been asked to review things like reviewing protocols and reviewing
Mm,
language summaries and marketing materials, and different things like that, and just kind of consulting in various ways, speaking on
interesting.
speaking on numerous panels, um, covering a wide variety of topics that are near and dear to my heart. Kind of hinted around health equity is incredibly important
Right.
to me, and I think that that's just kind of it's just organically grown. Where as you can imagine, I like to talk a lot, as you can see. So I'm kind of always
This
pushing
is
my
great.
way. I'm pushing my way into conversations at conferences, and always introducing myself, and as the patient, because in many conferences, I could be one of maybe five patients in the entire conference, and
Yeah, isn't
um,
that interesting?
and I
So,
cannot tell you how
so
surprising
how did
people
you,
are.
yeah, so how did you start to think to go to conferences and um
Honestly, I just because of my curious mind, I found my first conference. I just went to. I looked up saying conferences in the area. Again, I'm near the Philadelphia region, so there are conferences all the time,
yes.
and I reached out to the coordinator or the event coordinator and asked, do they have any patient scholarships? And they didn't at the time, but they said, but oh well, that makes sense, and
Hmm.
I was invited in. And then shortly thereafter, and I just kind of attended, didn't really say much, just kind of, looked around and got to know a few people. But then shortly thereafter, um, someone who I truly admire in the biotech industry was supposed to be speaking on a panel at an event, and she was unable to. And she suggested bringing me as a patient, and they didn't have any patients
Wow.
that were speaking at the entire conference, and then ended up not only bringing me as a panelist, but actually creating a rare disease panel. And we brought someone in from the
Wow.
National Organization of Rare Disorders, and then that was probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, and maybe a little less. And it's just grown organically. And I just do it on the side. It was never my full-time job, never has been, but it's something that I see as an honor if I can represent and be the voice of those who don't seem to have who aren't able to share their voice. I never want to say don't have a voice, because everyone has a voice, but aren't able to share
Everyone has a
it.
voice.
Then I find it an honor, and I will take advantage of every opportunity that I can.
That's amazing, Sabina. And okay, so that was 10 years ago, right? And even with other conferences that you've been to, I think you mentioned that there's still a handful or maybe less than a handful of patients in conferences, even today, 10 years later, right? And so actually something maybe a bit provocative. Why do you think that is? And also, um, so let me list a few questions, and then we'll take them in time, um, not necessarily chronologically. But why do you think there's still less than a handful of patients at conferences? And I still haven't seen a huge focus on patients. There is, even in patient engagement conferences, I'm not sure that there's always patients there, right?
You are absolutely.
That's one thing, right? The other thing is, the other question I'll ask is, what was the one, what surprised you the most? And let's start there, and then I'll ask some other questions that came to mind.
Surprised me the most at the early conferences,
Or
or
just overall in your experience of engaging with the
well,
development
I mean,
side of life
especially
sciences.
um, well, again, the sheer lack of patience is kind of
Yeah.
it's surprising and upsetting, frustrating.
Mm,
I think that one of the things that's interesting that happens a lot. So, you know, picture the normal conference setting where there's, I should say that that there's the big exhibit hall, and they have all
yes.
these providers that are there, either companies or
Vendors. Yeah.
vendors of some sort. So, we have our badge on, and my name will be there, and it'll say patient advocate. And you walk up to any of the vendors, and this happens so often. I was just at one a couple weeks ago, and it was a large conference. I walk up, and they immediately do the little look down to see what your name is, and they're trying to see what company I'm with, and it
Right.
doesn't have a company, and it just says patient advocate. And they said, oh, where are you from, and who? And I said, my name is Sabina. I represent the rare disease community. I'm a patient and caregiver. And they're like, oh, okay. And they don't know what to say. Like, I said,
Mm.
tell me about what you're doing to support drug development. What are you like? And they
So
have all
you're asking, you're the one who's engaging, you're asking the questions.
they're blown away
Yeah.
because they have no idea, because they're so focused in on the sales pitch, and have
Mm.
no idea that they, talking to their end user, if you want to say, really
Yes, right.
I mean, it happens constantly. And I can tell you, Zena, it's actually, I can get so frustrated sometimes, because I have been blown off so many times,
Mm.
by, and just like they try to do it politely, but I literally
Yeah.
said to one of them very tactfully, but again, this is my voice. I said, you do understand that, more and more patients are being invited into the C-suite to discuss their thoughts,
Mm.
their reasoning, and it really. And I go on my spiel about how important it is to have the patient voice. I said, I consult with companies, the ones that come to me and say, what do you think? But if I'm here with a vendor that has no interest in speaking to a patient, they're not, I'm not going to recommend them to a organization that's trying to improve um, what their focus on patients. And I guess it's just, that's the hard part. It still surprises me. And even going back to the events themselves, I can't tell you how many times I've been invited to speak on a panel, and I feel like I'm just like a still a like a check mark, like tick the box, had a patient,
Yeah.
but I'm not really able to. I'm not given the platform where I can truly share my opinions. So that's still happening. And some are wonderful where it's the absolute opposite and the focus is completely on the patients. But, you know, just keep.
And as you mentioned, mm, the patient is the end user, right? And who are we doing it for, if not for patients and for improvement of the condition? So it should be front and center. And I guess this is an evolution in companies and in departments where I would say it's probably more in the last 5 years, where I hear more about, patient centric, patient first. But it's not always practiced in every context,
Oh, no,
right?
no.
And even when we're looking at marketing or uh, sales areas or um, even writing a submission or beyond the clinical, let's say beyond the clinical where you're really dealing directly with the patient in their condition is in the clinical trials directly. um, but in every context, if we put the patient in mind or the patient's involved, it can change what decisions you may make.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, and, it's funny how you said the patient centric and patient centricity and patient first, those words that we've been hearing for, yeah, over 5, 10 years now. And, but I have definitely come to learn that there are quite a few, for lack of a better word, posers that are out there that
Yeah.
are just saying that because it is the thing to say. But like you said, I think a lot of these departments, especially past like the clinical side, that they're still living in silos, and they're not hearing the
That's the
patients.
thing,
They
right?
truly are. They're operating and living in silos because we all know that they have their goals and that they need to meet their agenda. We understand that. Patients understand that. And that goes back to what I was saying about trying to gather hard data to try to
Right.
show these people who are skeptics and not and think that patient engagement is just fluff and just kind of checking us on the box, checking the box off. But I will say that there is a lot of hope out there because I have personally met some companies, and it's kind of funny because it tends to start with the smaller biotech companies.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Yes, especially those in the rare disease because the companies that start in the rare disease space are generally
Right.
have some personal skin in the game, if you want to call it that. And they see the importance of patient engagement. Ideally, the ideal world is to have every company have a patient advocacy department, a large one, not 5 people in a department of in a company with 50,000 employees. I think that's just
Yeah.
impossible. But
And they might not even be full time in that
no,
role, right? The roles might be split.
exactly. So I know of companies that have done, I mean, there's so many ways, practical ways that companies can infuse the patient voice in the daily activities. Like, again, having a strong department, patient advocacy department, where you have members of that department that sit in meetings, true decision making meetings within other departments. Any decision, major decision meeting that is happening that's going to impact the patient, so have them go to a marketing meeting, be the patient,
Right.
go to,
Have
ClinOps,
that
go
cross
there. So
fertilization,
they're
right?
exactly to
Yeah.
make sure that the patient voice is truly infused in all that they
Mm.
do. Making sure that new hires understand what it means like to be a patient, bringing patients in, not just marching a patient in every once in a while to share their journey, and again, mark that up, but really having people like some of my biggest joys have been being able to go to a company and talking to the accountants, the people in the custodial thing, all of those people, especially the smaller companies that are working so hard to meet a goal and that have never met a patient, or those I remember speaking, I had an opportunity, there's a couple times I spoke with young students that were working in a lab for 2 years on working with mice models and stuff for Fabry, and have never met a Fabry patient. And I sat with them and they were just talking
Wow.
questions, but they're putting their heart and soul into this. So it kind of brings the patient voice there and put a face to their work. And it adds value to their work.
Makes it more real versus
Yeah, or
academic.
speaking to a graduating class of genetic counselors, I talk to them about
Ah, right.
what you're going to deal with when a family is diagnosed. But anyway, but that's kind of, I'm kind of going off tangent here, but
No, not
yeah,
at all.
these companies that are, you can tell the difference that of the ones that are just saying they're patient centric, but those that are truly put the patient at the heart of everything that they do.
Yeah, and Sabina, so given all that, you've probably somewhat answered this question already, but let's put a focus on that. Why do you think at these conferences there's not larger number of patients?
Um, well, one, I don't think we're invited. I mean, it's
Hmm,
really like I don't think they just event coordinators just don't think to reach out, and maybe they don't know where to reach out. But there's so many amazing patient advocacy groups that can tell you, this community member is comfortable speaking, or they have a unique story,
right.
they have this, or asking, people within industry who they've connected with, what patients they've connected with. I think that's important. They just need to reach out. I just don't think that they just think that that's either a possibility or just don't. They still don't see the importance of it.
So you just mentioned about patient advocacy groups saying, well, we have a speaker who's comfortable with speaking on such and such areas and topics. So how how did you become a patient advocate? Sounds like it was kind of organic in the way you got into it, right? Um, and you had that curiosity and such, so you kind of went and sought it out. How do you counsel other patients to be patient advocates, or what do you think that there are barriers from patients' point of view where they could be advocates but maybe haven't thought about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you have different types of personalities. That one, they're definitely the introverts,
And it's
that's
very personal,
comfortable.
right?
It
So
is a very
yeah,
personal, how do you feel about sharing your story?
yeah,
But I think that people, okay, there's a lot of people out there that want to share their story and they may not know how to. And there
mm,
are resources out there that help patients truly build their storytelling techniques and their skills. I think that I would love to be like mentor other patients to be able to do that. And I've spoken to many, but I just think that just them giving the opportunity and then understanding this is a big thing too. So many event coordinators will still invite patients to come speak on panels and not give them either a discount, like invite them, either pay them as they would any other expert speaker, or they treat them
right.
as as like a pharma rep or a biotech rep, not understanding that they don't
Hmm,
have anyone paying their way. So I was
I
invited to.
see.
I'll give an example. Just recently, I was invited to speak at a show, at a conference, be a panelist, and they told me that they'll give me, speaking. I'll get a discounted rate of $1,200. Well, I in no way am I spending $1,200 driving somewhere, speaking for 15 minutes, and then coming back, and I'm paying them, or just I- you're asking me. I don't
You're also traveling and yeah,
but I also am not working for a company that's going to pay for that.
that's
I'm
right.
not representing, any of the, big pharma or biotech company. I am a patient advocate. You want a real patient or real lived experience? It's not necessarily going to be someone that works for, a company that's going to be able to pay for it. So be prepared
Right.
for that. and offer them free, registration. Come, you're invited to stay all 3 days of the registration. We'll give you a stipend and we'll pay for your hotel, or we'll, and fortunately, I'm blessed with a lot of event coordinators will do that now, but so many out there still don't see patients
Mm,
as the expert, or they don't, or they won't pay them like they would um, a physician that's speaking. But
right.
there's and
Right.
there are scales out there. There are resources that help determine like the standard payment scales, or what's appropriate. And I can't think of the word. I'm
Hmm.
sorry, which one that's out there. But there are compensation like schedules that you can look at what's appropriate to pay for a speaker. But I think that's something that I think event coordinators really need to take into consideration.
Yeah, it's really, really going deep on what's the purpose of the patient being there, right? And then you take that decision because that's the value add for the conference as well and for the discussion. Um, and it's not an organization representing their data, right?
Exactly.
Or talking about their research. It's actually uh, someone who's going to use the product potentially or speak on behalf of others who would be.
Exactly.
So, given all of your experience collectively now, and you may have, you kind of hit on this as well, but let's go a little deeper if that's possible on um what would you like to happen? I mean, what have you thought about and said, if only this could happen? Um, it's another way of saying what's a gap, but in a more positive way in terms of the opportunity uh, for life sciences, for biotech in with patient advocacy. What do you think they haven't thought of yet that they could? Um, that might be based on a gap or an unmet need, but also an opportunity. How the experience of patients could could advance based on current knowledge of patients, so how it could advance what's being done today.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of really good things are happening out there. I just think that there needs to be more of it. I think what I
Yeah.
talked about the smaller biotech companies having the true focus on patient advocacy infused throughout their daily activities. I think that's incredibly important. I think the open communication between the patient community and the company needs to be always flowing. It needs to be going back and forth. I think that patients should be able to reach out with questions and concerns whether it's in the drug development process or other aspects or post market. I think there needs to be resources like well connected and again easily accessible. Um, One other thing I think when you talk about a gap, again, I kind of lent to this leaned into this a little bit earlier, is reaching a much more diverse community
Yeah.
of patients. I think there's a huge gap in the underserved populations. I think populations, you think of just race, but there's age, race, disability, age. I think the elderly
Yeah.
population is overlooked. I think the pediatric population is overlooked a lot. I think the indigenous people population
Mm,
is overlooked tremendously. So reaching out to them and providing the resources that make it easily accessible for them. There's so many things that
there's
they're
so
it's
many
just
things.
starting,
Yeah.
but it's going in the right direction. And I always, always, always try to remain hopeful. I mean, it's very easy to be negative and think that it's not, um, you know, things are always bad and people don't care and they don't want to hear the patient voice. But then I look back at these past 40 years, and how my life has changed drastically, and the people I've met along the way, and the advances in science and the advances in just community building, that have come together. So I had a lot of hope moving forward, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I guess, this is a great point, Sabina. And you just have a glow around you as well, and can see a lot of positivity. And I'm sure it's difficult, but you seem to have a lot of positivity within you and wanting to advance. Also, a lot of curiosity and how things can be done better, and lending your voice as well, and being involved, and having the curiosity on, well, how do things work in the corporation? Let's get real, so to speak. Well, how do you well, you know how do you get involved with the patient? I love how you describe the experience of going and talking to the vendors and actually asking them the questions. That's I think you may not get the best answer at that time, but it could be the next time you ask somebody, that person, I'm sure it was, probably thought, probably made an impact and thought, hmm, I couldn't answer that question,
I
right?
hope so.
Yeah. So I think, to your point, that continuous engagement is important, and to have that two-way communication, and to keep being present there as well. And as you said, a lot of things have progressed. I think where the opportunity gaps may be is that a lot of things have progressed, and they could progress more if not for more knowledge, right? More awareness. So
Exactly.
maybe that's where also the need for more awareness and firsthand experience, and actually putting yourself in the patient's shoes, and looking through things, and getting out of the slide deck, out of the protocol paper, and really kind of going, well, what's really happening in life situation. I think I often feel the more and more technology is advancing, and we've got all these digital tools, and they're becoming more and more, and AI and all of this, that we need to make sure we don't forget the humanity, right? That human connection is so important. Looking in the eye, and the touch and feel as well. All of these things make a difference, and that's what you have to really think about when you are designing trials as well. What is the patient touching and feeling? How are they interacting, and what's happening with their day?
No, I firmly agree. It is very easy to just forget the person, but
Yeah.
really that's what it's all about. In the end, you're talking people. It's talking about the heart of what's happening in their experience, and how we can all make each other's lives better and easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So if Sabina, if people want to get in touch with you and bring you on into their conversations, and in whatever format or context that may be, um, you know, you're you're very easy to talk to, and you have you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experiences, and I think you can speak on so many different levels. So if people want to contact you, what's the best way to do that? And what's the best way that you like to get involved?
Oh, probably just find me on LinkedIn. I'm always writing something or sharing some article, or commenting on someone's post on LinkedIn. You just find me under my name. But yeah, I like to always see what's happening out there. So anyone could always reach out to me.
Fantastic. So we'll have Sabina's information in the show notes. So do reach out. Anything you might be curious about. I think she can engage with you, or perhaps recommend who you could engage with, I'm sure. Sabina, thank you so much for joining me on this platform, on this podcast. I think after meeting you in the spring, and we shared a cab, and it was so enlightening talking to you, Sabina. I learned so much, and I thought, if this, if anything is ipso facto,
Mhm.
it is this, right? It's about the voice of the patient, and remember who we're doing this for. So I really appreciate you coming on today, Sabina. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and I wish you the best of luck with this.
Thank you. Take care.